The Sith Order was named after a species, not a title, not a rank, not a philosophical designation conjured by some ancient dark side mystic who needed a word for what he was building. A living alien race, red-skinned humanoids native to a planet called Korriban, who existed, breathed, and drew sustenance from the dark side of the Force, thousands of years before Palpatine, before Vader, before any Sith Lord whose name appears in any corner of canon or legends. The canonical Wikipedia article on the Sith states it plainly. The Order shared their name with a red-skinned species. A 2017 official Star Wars reference workbook defines Sith not as a rank, not as a dark side philosophy, not as a title claimed by someone calling themselves Darth, but as an alien species with red skin and tentacles. That's not theory, that's the record. So here is the question that record raises. What if the Jedi did the exact same thing? Every known member of Yoda's species is Force sensitive. Every single one is Jedi affiliated. None has ever appeared as a Sith, as a non-Force sensitive individual, or in any context outside the Jedi Order in any canon or legend source ever produced. The species has no confirmed homeworld in the official record. It has no name. It has existed in this franchise since 1980, appeared in 6 theatrical films, 2 flagship animated series, and the streaming era's most prominent Star Wars production, and across 45 years of storytelling, with institutional deliberateness, Lucasfilm has never assigned it a designation of any kind. The Star Wars databank lists the species simply as unknown. The Sith precedent proves the Star Wars galaxy already operates on a species-to-order naming pipeline. The pattern in Yoda's species record provides the evidence. The deliberate namelessness provides the vault. The theory, not canonical truth, but the strongest case the available evidence supports, is that the name has been hiding in plain sight for 4.5 decades. The case starts on Korriban. Because if you don't understand what the Sith were before they were an order, none of what follows carries the weight it needs to. Korriban isn't a welcoming world. The legends record and what canon acknowledges of the planet describe a barren, arid landscape of ochre dust and valley tombs, a world that radiates something darker than desolation, a place where the Force itself feels corrupted, where the atmosphere seems to press inward on everything that enters it. Long before the tombs were built, long before Darth Bane walked those valleys, Korriban was inhabited. The natives were humanoid, but unmistakably not human. Red-skinned, with facial tendrils capable of displaying emotion through independent movement, bone spurs across their frames, builds that legend sources describe as ape-like, and a physiology shaped by a world steeped in the dark side. These were the Sith species, the original Sith, before that word meant anything else. What set them apart wasn't their appearance, it was their relationship to the Force. The Sith species were innately Force-sensitive before any outside contact. Their connection to the dark side wasn't learned, not borrowed, not introduced by any external civilization. One account describes them as having an unusually high number of Force-sensitive individuals, creating a symbiotic relationship where they derived sustenance directly from the dark side of the Force. Their entire culture, rituals, hierarchy, worldview, was organized around and through the dark side. Not because they had been taught that the dark side was correct, because the dark side was native to them. It was metabolic. They didn't choose it any more than a plant chooses sunlight. Approximately 6,900 years before the Battle of Yavin, a fleet of exiled Dark Jedi descended through Korriban's atmosphere. Led by Ajunta Pall, they were the surviving remnant of a group expelled from the Jedi Order during the 100-Year Darkness. A war fought over whether dark side Force techniques could coexist with Jedi tradition. The losing faction lost definitively. Exiled into the unmapped edges of known space, Paul's group navigated through uncharted systems until they found Korriban. The encounter that followed wasn't what they expected. These were former Jedi, trained Force users, technologically sophisticated, experienced in galactic civilization. They arrived expecting, reasonably for their era, that they were the most advanced Force wielders in the galaxy. What they found was a species that had been cultivating the dark side of the Force for longer than the Jedi Order had existed. When Legends texts describe the native Sith as initially impressed by the exiles' technology, the subtext is that technology was the one advantage the exiles held. In the Force, the knowledge transfer ran the other direction entirely. Ajunta Paul and his companions had dark side techniques honed over years of conflict. The Sith species had dark side practices refined across generations of a culture built entirely around them. The exiles learned. Over the centuries following that first contact, the two populations interbred. This wasn't a simple process. The physiological difference between human-descended Dark Jedi and the Sith species was substantial enough that the Legends text, the Book of the Sith, references dark side alchemy as the mechanism that made cross-species reproduction possible. Alchemy at the biological level, the Force itself manipulated to enable a fusion that biology alone wouldn't have permitted. From that fusion came a new ruling caste, the Kisai, the earliest Sith Lords, descended from the 12 among Ajunta Paul's exiles who rose to positions of dominance over the combined population. These 12 became the first to formally carry the title of Sith Lord. The title they carried was drawn from the name of the people they had absorbed. The Sith species themselves, over subsequent generations, relocated from Korriban to the ice world Ziost when Korriban became uninhabitable. The consequence, in some accounts, of the same dark side energies that had constituted their power. The pure-blood Sith species, as a distinct biological population, gradually diminished, absorbed into the genetic lineages of the expanding Sith Lords until the original people existed only in fragments. The Massassi, described in Legends as a Sith subspecies, appear in multiple canon books as former inhabitants of Yavin 4, their temples still standing when the Rebel Alliance arrived 3,000 years later. The species that gave the Order its name was effectively gone. The name endured. The Sith Order's formal establishment is dated in the Legends timeline to approximately 5000 BBY, roughly 1,900 years after the initial Korriban encounters. The full mechanism of how the species name transferred to the Order is documented explicitly in Legends continuity. In Disney-era canon, the complete origin story is minimally addressed, but the canonical article on the Sith confirms the naming connection. The Order shared their name with a red-skinned species. The naming crossed the Legends to canon boundary even where the full narrative didn't. Before mapping this template onto Yoda species, one distinction needs to be made honestly, because skipping it would hand critics a legitimate objection. The Sith case runs in a specific direction. Dark Jedi exiles arrived from outside, conquered, interbred with, and absorbed the native Sith people, and in the process, took the conquered species' name for the tradition they were building. The species didn't found the Order. Outside founders absorbed the species' identity over generations. The flow runs: conquest, then absorption, then name adoption. The theory about Yoda's species implies a different direction. Not that outside forces absorbed the species and took their name, but that the species founded or constituted the earliest Jedi Order, and the Order retained the species' name because, at origin, the species and the Order were effectively the same entity. The direction is inverted. Both produce the same outcome, an Order named after a species. But the mechanisms differ, and acknowledging that openly is more useful than pretending the parallel is perfect. What the Sith case proves is that this outcome, an Order named after a species, is a documented feature of the Star Wars universe. The template exists. The galaxy operates this way. The question is whether it was used once. 6 members of Yoda's species appear in the combined canon and Legends record. Minch, referenced in a 2003 Legends comic from around 700 BBY, has disputed distinct identity from Yoda in some analyses. An unnamed figure implied in the Valley of the Jedi on Rawson remains implied rather than confirmed. The 5 with clear documentation are Vandar Tokare, Yaddle, Yoda, Oteg, and Grogu. Run each one through 2 questions: Force-sensitive and Jedi-affiliated. Vandar Tokare is the critical starting point, not because he's the most famous, but because his timeline reaches furthest into the past. He was active as a Jedi Master approximately 4,000 years before the Battle of Yavin, during the Old Republic era of the Knights of the Old Republic games. Vandar sat on the Jedi Council at the Jedi Enclave on Dantooine, not the Coruscant Temple, but the Dantooine outpost that served as the Order's primary base of operations in that period. Legend sources describe his raw force ability and lightsaber capability as among the few genuine parallels to Yoda's in the full span of the Order's documented history. His existence at 4000 BBY means the species Jedi connection doesn't originate with Yoda's 896 BBY birth. It predates Yoda by 3,000 years. That's not a coincidence localized to one exceptional individual. That's a structural tie, embedded in the Order's foundational era. Force-sensitive, confirmed. Jedi-affiliated, confirmed. Council connection, confirmed. Yaddle was born 509 BBY, nearly 400 years after Yoda, making her the youngest of the 3 known adult council members by birth year. She reached the rank of Jedi Master and secured a seat on the Jedi High Council, appearing in The Phantom Menace alongside Yoda at the peak of the Republic-era Council's authority. She trained at least one Padawan to Jedi knighthood, Oppo Rancisis, who himself eventually became a Jedi Master and Council member. The lineage extends. She didn't merely serve the Order, she produced another Council member from within it. The Star Wars Visual Encyclopedia's language around her is telling in its restraint. It states that Yaddle and Yoda are the only 2 known examples of their species, written before Grogu's introduction in 2019, treating the species as so exceptional that 2 confirmed members constituted the totality of what the official record could attest. Her appearance in canon animation in Tales of the Jedi confirms her continuity well into the Disney era. Force-sensitive, confirmed. Jedi-affiliated, confirmed. Council connection, confirmed. Yoda needs less introduction than any other figure in this analysis, which is precisely why his specific details matter more than his fame. Born 896 BBY, died on Dagobah at approximately 900 years of age. Grand Master of the Jedi Order, the highest title the organization conferred. Sat on the High Council for the better part of a millennium. His training record spans hundreds of Padawans across those centuries, including Count Dooku and Luke Skywalker at opposite ends of his teaching career. His Force abilities are documented across 6 theatrical films and multiple animated series spanning both the prequel and Disney eras. Nothing about his species is named in any of that documentation. His homeworld appears nowhere in the Jedi archives. And for the head of an organization with records spanning 25,000 years, that is a specific and deliberate absence. Force-sensitive, confirmed beyond any meaningful qualification. Jedi-affiliated. He was the apex of the structure. Oteg operates entirely within Legends continuity, specifically the Star Wars The Old Republic game. He holds the rank of Jedi Master and the additional distinction of Fleet Admiral, a military command role that positions him differently from his council-focused species counterparts. Legends sources credit him with destroying an entire fleet of the resurgent Sith Empire, making him the most militarily consequential documented member of the species in the available record. The scope of it, fleet command, direct engagement with Sith forces, strategic military leadership, suggests that whatever qualities make this species consistently force-sensitive extend into extraordinary command capability as well. Force-sensitive, confirmed. Jedi-affiliated, confirmed. Grogu, introduced in The Mandalorian in 2019, is the member who most stresses the pattern and most reinforces it. Born approximately 41 years before the Battle of Yavin. During the events of The Mandalorian, he is around 50 years old, but the species doesn't reach developmental maturity until approximately 100 years of age, making him the biological equivalent of a very young child. He has no formal Jedi rank. He wasn't raised within Jedi institutional structures. He survived Order 66 as a foundling, eventually recovered by a Mandalorian bounty hunter named Din Djarin, with no prior Jedi connection whatsoever. His route into the documented record was non-Jedi by definition: an Imperial retrieval mission, a Mandalorian contract, a chain of events that had nothing to do with the Order's record-keeping apparatus. And yet he demonstrates telekinesis, force healing, and force choking on screen. 3 distinct force disciplines in a being who hasn't reached the developmental equivalent of early childhood by his species' own biological timeline. Every indication of his narrative trajectory points toward continued Jedi training under Luke Skywalker and beyond. Grogu's significance for the pattern argument is difficult to overstate. Every other documented member of the species entered the historical record through Jedi channels. They trained within the Order, sat on its councils, appeared in its archives. Grogu didn't. Nothing about how he entered the record selects for Jedi affiliation. He arrived at the pattern from the outside and still broke it 0 times. The catalog. 5 confirmed members across 4,000 years of timeline, 2 distinct continuities, 1 foundling route into the record through non-institutional channels, and a result that doesn't vary. Force-sensitive, every time. Jedi-affiliated, every time. No Sith. No non-force-sensitive individual. No member appearing in any capacity outside the Jedi Order's orbit. 3 explanations exist for a pattern this consistent. First, sample size bias. Only 5 to 6 members of the species appear in the entire Star Wars record. The Jedi kept the records, and their members survived long enough to enter the historical archive. It's possible that millions of this species exist somewhere in the galaxy, living ordinary, non-force-sensitive lives, and we simply haven't encountered them because the historical lens was pointed at the Jedi. Possible. But Grogu's path into the record pushes hard against this. He didn't enter through Jedi record-keeping. He stumbled in through an Imperial retrieval mission. And he still matches the pattern. More importantly, if millions of non-force-sensitive members existed, and the Jedi Order happened to produce every documented instance, that selection mechanism would itself require explanation. Second, the species is universally or near universally force-sensitive, similar to how the Sith species had an unusually high number of force-sensitive individuals. Their biology produces force-sensitives at a rate so dramatically higher than other species that all documented instances are force users by statistical inevitability. Plausible, probably true, and fully compatible with the third explanation rather than contradictory to it. A species can be universally force-sensitive and still have a name. The Sith species was universally force-sensitive, and their name became the Order's name. Universal force sensitivity and naming origin aren't mutually exclusive. Third, the species and the Jedi Order share a foundational identity. The species gave the Order its name because, at some point in galactic history, the two were effectively the same entity. This is the theory, and the second explanation doesn't preclude it. If you were a species universally aligned with the light side of the Force, constitutive of or central to the founding of a light side order, both things would be simultaneously true. You'd be universally force-sensitive, and the Order would carry your name. The single most substantive objection to this theory isn't about force sensitivity or species patterns. It's about historical record. The Jedi Order has an origin story, and Yoda's species doesn't appear in it. In Legends continuity, with canon status for this material contested after Disney's 2012 acquisition, the Jedi Order traces back to 36,453 BBY. 9 great pyramid-shaped starships, called the To-Yor, appeared across different worlds in the galaxy, each drawing force-sensitive beings toward it with a pull that couldn't be explained by any known technology or communication method. The ships converged on Tython, a planet in the galaxy's deep core, a region so dense with stars and gravitational interference that navigation through it bordered on impossible by standard hyperdrive technology. Force-sensitive pilgrims from what available sources describe as over a dozen species traveled to Tython aboard those 9 ships and established the Jedi Order. The Jedi philosophy was built on balance. Tython has 2 moons, Ashla, associated with the light side of the Force, and Bogan, associated with the dark. The Jedi sought the center between them, a path of dynamic equilibrium where neither extreme held permanent dominance. 9 temples were constructed at the 9 Thoyor landing sites. A council of 9 temple masters governed the order, 1 per temple, each site dedicated to a different facet of Jedi study and practice. The name Jedi itself derives from the Talid species Order of Dai Bendu, and in that language translates to mystic center, the founding philosophy embedded directly in the order's name from its first day of existence. For more than 10,000 years, the Jedi maintained that balance at Tython. Then, approximately 25,793 BBY, the Force Wars erupted, a civil war pitting Ashla-aligned practitioners against Bogan-aligned followers. The dark side faction was defeated. Survivors aligned with the light eventually departed Tython, relocated to the world of Ossus, and integrated with the early Galactic Republic. The transition from Jedi Order to the Jedi Order we recognize is dated in legends to approximately 26,000 BBY. The Je prefix was dropped. The balance philosophy gave way to a more explicitly light side orientation. The tradition continued under a shorter name. Yoda species appears nowhere in this founding history. Not in the Thoyor ships, not in the Jedi Council, not in the Force Wars, not in the Ossus transition. No source covering the Jedi founding period mentions a member of Yoda's species at any point. The species receives no mention in any available source for the entire Jedi era or the early Jedi period. That objection is accurate, and dismissing it would be a mistake. Here is where the theory survives, and specifically how. The founding record is incomplete by definition. Over a dozen species traveled to Tython on the Thoyor ships. The specific species aboard each of the 9 ships aren't named in any available source. The Dawn of the Jedi comic series, which covers the Jedi era in Legends, is a narrative work, stories told about specific characters and events in that period, not a comprehensive census of every species that arrived at Tython. There is a significant gap between not mentioned in the available stories about Tython and confirmed absent from Tython. The research on this specific question is direct. Yoda's species is neither confirmed present nor confirmed absent. It simply receives no mention in the available sources. Absence from the narrative isn't the same as absence from the event. The naming event and the founding event are also separable, and the Sith case demonstrates this with particular clarity. The native Sith species didn't found the Sith Order. Ajunta Pal's Dark Jedi exiles founded it, from entirely outside the species. The Sith species was the conquered population. The exiles were the founders. Yet the Order carries the species' name, not the founders' names. The name transfer happened because the founders absorbed the conquered people's identity over generations of interbreeding and cultural fusion, not because the conquered species was present at the founding. A species can give its name to an order without being among that order's founders. If members of Yoda's species became sufficiently central to the Jedi tradition in the centuries or millennia following the Jedi to Jedi transition, closer to Vandar Tokari's era at 4000 BBY, perhaps, their name could have attached to the tradition during that later period, leaving no trace in the Tython founding records because the naming event post-dated the founding by thousands of years. The Jedi name itself carries a structural note worth examining. Jedi translates to mystic center in the Talid language. When the Jedi became the Jedi, when the balance philosophy gave way to a light side orientation after the Force Wars, the name contracted. Jedi became Jedi. The question of what that contraction preserved is linguistically significant. If the Jedi root came to carry its own meaning independent of its Talid etymology, that's consistent with a later naming event attaching additional significance to the same syllables. Names in linguistic history carry sedimentary meaning, older connotations buried under newer usage. Jedi, as the name of a species, accumulated beneath Jedi as the name of an order, would be exactly the kind of layered designation that ancient naming conventions produce. The contraction from Jedi to Jedi may not just be abbreviation. It may be the moment the species name became audible inside the tradition's name for the first time. The Tython objection still stands in its strongest form. If Yoda's species founded the Jedi Order from the very beginning, the founding record should show them, and it doesn't. The The theory's founding-era claim is genuinely weakened by the Jedi narrative. What the evidence supports is more calibrated. That at some point in the Jedi Order's long history, Yoda's species name became the Order's name, whether through founding-era presence that the fragmentary record doesn't document, or through a later naming event during the millennia between the Tho-Yor arrival and the Old Republic era. The founding claim and the naming claim are separable. The naming claim is what the three-pillar case actually rests on. Two specific aspects of the species deserve cleaner treatment than they typically receive, because both carry implications for how deep the Jedi connection runs. The first is Yoda's speech. The distinctive object-subject-verb inversion. The syntax that produces, "When 900 years old you reach, look as good you won't," rather than the standard basic construction, has generated sustained discussion across the lore community. One explanation with notable persistence holds that Yoda's inverted syntax is a deliberate personal choice to honor his own Jedi Master, a speech pattern inherited from a revered teacher and preserved across 900 years of life through discipline and intentionality. The honest position on this explanation is that it appears primarily in secondary commentary rather than in a clearly citable primary canon source. It occupies the plausible end of the lore space rather than standing as an established fact. But it points towards something the available evidence does support. The speech pattern isn't confirmed as a species-wide biological trait. Yaddle, born 509 BBY, does not consistently speak with OSV syntax in her canon appearances. Vandar Tokare, active at 4000 BBY, isn't documented as sharing the pattern. If the inverted syntax were a species-wide feature of how the species processes or produces language, it would appear in more than one member's documented speech. Its apparent localization to Yoda, and potentially Minch, the disputed Legends figure from around 700 BBY, suggests something individual rather than biological. Linguistic drift offers a complementary frame. Yoda was born 896 BBY and has been speaking Galactic Basic, or predecessor forms of Basic, for approximately 9 centuries. Languages evolve. Grammatical structures shift across generations of speakers. The OSV syntax he uses may represent an archaic form of Basic more common in earlier galactic eras, preserved in Yoda's speech while the language itself moved past it. A being who has been speaking the same language for 900 years retains constructions that contemporary speakers abandoned centuries ago. His syntax is, in this reading, a form of linguistic preservation, not a species marker, but a timestamp. Grogu, developmentally pre-verbal at 50 years old, contributes no speech data and won't for some time to come. By his species' biological timeline, he hasn't yet reached the developmental stage where language acquisition typically begins. Neither the master honoring theory nor the linguistic drift argument has definitive canonical support. But both are more consistent with the available evidence than treating the syntax as a species-wide trait, because the available evidence doesn't show it as species-wide. The speech is Yoda's, not the species. The second aspect is more structurally significant: the homeworld. No member of Yoda's species has a documented homeworld in any canon or legend source. That absence isn't merely a detail about Yoda's personal privacy. It extends to Yaddle, to Vandar Tokare, to Oteg, to Grogu. The species as a whole has no confirmed world of origin in any official material. The homeworld of the all-powerful Jedi Yoda has never been revealed in any Star Wars media, one source states directly. Community discussion raises the possibility that the homeworld was destroyed or lost to any astronavigational charts, or that the species deliberately concealed it. A species whose homeworld has been scrubbed from, or never entered, the galactic record is a species with something to protect, or something already lost. A species whose world of origin is unknown in a galaxy with comprehensive astronomical records isn't a species that exists incidentally. Both vaults, the name and the homeworld, are locked from the same direction, by the same institutional hand, across the same 45 years of deliberate omission. George Lucas never named Yoda's species. Dave Filoni, who served as supervising director on The Clone Wars, the animated series that dove deeper into Jedi lore than any other Star Wars production up to its time, confirmed directly when Season 3 created an opportunity to address Yoda's origins. Revealing the homeworld, Filoni said, would ruin a major part of the fun of Yoda's character, the mystery of his origins. That's a specific production decision, made at a specific moment, documented in Filoni's own words. The opportunity existed. It was declined. The mystery wasn't preserved through inattention. It was preserved through active institutional choice. The Star Wars databank lists the species as unknown. The visual encyclopedia uses Yoda's species as a placeholder. One analysis of the franchise's treatment of this question notes explicitly that this isn't a post-Disney decision. It has always been that way. Lucasfilm maintained the anonymity before the Disney acquisition, through the acquisition, and across 3 seasons of The Mandalorian, a streaming series that made a member of Yoda's species its central emotional core for years, and still declined every opportunity to provide a name. Filoni and Jon Favreau could have named the species at any point during production. The name never came. Yoda works, in significant part, because he exists outside the normal lore accounting. He has no homeworld in the archives. His species has no designation in the databank. He appeared in the galaxy apparently fully formed, achieved the highest rank the Order conferred, and then kept the specific coordinates of his origins sealed behind a level of discretion that the Jedi archives themselves couldn't penetrate. For the Grand Master of an organization with records spanning 25,000 years, that level of personal opacity isn't an accident. There is a portion of the audience for whom the mystery being solved would be worse than the mystery remaining open. The deliberateness of Lucas's design choice elevates the namelessness from oversight to artistic commitment, a character whose power is inseparable from what isn't known about him. This video isn't arguing that the mystery should be resolved by Lucasfilm or that any future production owes the audience an answer. Lucas's design choice is legitimate. The mystery is the point, and it was built that way on purpose. What this video argues is that the available evidence has a shape, a consistent, non-random shape that points in one direction, and the strongest theory fitting that shape is also the structurally simplest one. Every creative choice made about this species, the universal force sensitivity, the consistent Jedi affiliation, the absent homeworld, the withheld name, reflects deliberate decisions made by people who knew exactly what they were constructing. The pattern in the evidence is intentional. Whether the intention is the mystery itself, or whether the mystery is protecting a specific answer that has never been said aloud, is what the 3-pillar case addresses. The species currently has one widely circulated descriptor in lore discussion: tridactyl. Derived from the 3-fingered hands common to all known members, the term appears in some published analysis, including at least one published book, as shorthand for the species. It carries 0 official Star Wars designation. It doesn't appear in the Star Wars databank. It doesn't appear in any canon production. Lucasfilm doesn't use it. It's a descriptive label that writers and fans reached for because the actual designation doesn't exist in any accessible official source. A workaround for an absence, not a name. Using tridactyl as though it were the species' official name would be inaccurate in a way that matters. It presents an unofficial fan descriptor as something the Star Wars universe itself recognizes, which it doesn't. The species' hands are tridactyl. The species has no name. They've been in this franchise since 1980. 6 theatrical films, multiple animated series across both production eras, 3 seasons of flagship streaming content. In every piece of official material across that entire span, they are referred to only as Yoda's species. That level of sustained namelessness, maintained by an organization as documentation-intensive as Lucasfilm across 4.5 decades, isn't a gap. It's a decision. The question is what the decision is protecting. The case assembled. First pillar, the Sith precedent. Star Wars has a documented in-universe mechanism by which an order carries a species name. The canonical Wikipedia article confirms the Sith Order shared their name with a red-skinned species. A 2017 official reference workbook defines the Sith as a species first, a tradition second. The naming pipeline exists in the fiction, proven, documented, crossing the legends to canon boundary. This isn't an analogy constructed from outside the franchise. It's a template that already exists inside it, already used once, already canon adjacent in its acknowledgement. Second pillar, the pattern. 5 confirmed members across 4,000 years of documented timeline, 2 distinct continuities, 1 route into the record through entirely non-Jedi channels via The Mandalorian. Force-sensitive every time, Jedi-affiliated every time, no Sith member recorded in any source, no non-Force-sensitive member recorded in any source, no member appearing outside the Jedi Order's orbit in any context whatsoever. In a galaxy where Force sensitivity in most species runs at a fraction of 1% of the population, a sample of 5 individuals from the same species producing 0 exceptions across 4,000 years is a signal, not a coincidence. Third pillar, the vault. For 45 years, with full institutional deliberateness and multiple documented opportunities to change course, the species' name and homeworld have been withheld. That level of careful, multi-decade omission in a franchise this heavily documented isn't passive. The name isn't missing. It's being kept. The question is whether the vault is the point, or whether what's inside it has been audible in every scene in every film, just without anyone connecting the sound to the source. The theory these 3 pillars support is this. The name of Yoda's species is Jedi, not tridactyl, not some undiscovered alien syllable waiting in a Legends comic that hasn't been written yet. The name that appears in the title of every film, the name spoken in every scene where these beings are discussed, and in every scene where they aren't, because the name belongs to the tradition that may have carried it since the species itself carried it first. An order carries a species name. The species is universally affiliated with that order. The withheld designation is the one thing about the species that has never actually been withheld, because it hasn't needed to be. It has been said constantly, for 45 years, in every context where this species appears. The association was simply never made explicit. The Sith species gave their name to an order that survived them by millennia. The order became so thoroughly identified with that name that the original species was reduced, by the time of the Disney-era canon, to a single line in a 2017 children's reference workbook. The species was gone. The name remained, attached to the tradition that absorbed it, carried forward through every generation of Sith Lords until Palpatine and Vader wielded it without knowing or caring that it once belonged to a people with red skin and facial tendrils on a desolate, Force-corrupted world. If the Jedi Order bears the same relationship to Yoda's species, if Jedi was once the name of a people before it became the name of a tradition, then Yoda's species isn't nameless. They've been named in every film, in every scene. The name stopped being associated with the species so completely and so long ago that no one alive in the modern Star Wars timeline recognizes the connection. Yoda himself, the last surviving Grand Master, was the most thoroughly identified bearer of both the species and the title simultaneously. He kept his homeworld out of the archives. He kept his origins sealed. He sat at the head of the order that may have carried his people's name for 25,000 years, while the current membership had no idea why. The strongest theory says the name has been hiding in plain sight. Whether Lucasfilm ever confirms it, or keeps the mystery sealed for another 45 years, or hands the answer to some future Star Wars story set in an era before the Jedi dropped the Je, the evidence already points to one name. It's the name spoken at the beginning and end of every story set in this galaxy. It may have always been the name of the people. If the Sith could name an entire order after their species, and the galaxy remembered it for thousands of years, long after the species was gone, long after anyone alive knew what the word originally referred to, There's no structural reason the Jedi would do any less. Subscribe if you want to keep building this case.